Hi, everybody. My name is Curtis Wagner. I'm a first year here at MIT Sloan, and I'm a student lead for this panel entitled Caught in a Pickle, What's Next for Baseball Analytics. I'm excited to introduce our guests behind me. We have Pat Young, who is the Director of Engineering at LBI Dynasty. We have Harry Pavlidis, who is the Director of Technology at Baseball Prospectus. We have Dave Cameron, who is the Managing Editor at Fangraphs. And we have Mike Petriello, who is a stats analyst at MLB.am. The panel will be moderated by Brian Kenny of MLB Network. The panel will last 45 minutes with 15 minutes of moderated Q&A at the end. We encourage you to interact with us via Twitter and ask questions using the hashtag #What'sNextBaseball. And with that, take it away, guys.
All right. Thank you, Curtis.
Thanks, Brian.
All right, so we're here now, as I said in Rocky III, in the flesh, baby. Yes. We get to see each other close up. All right, so let's start with, before we get to what's next, where are we now? Mike, why don't you start us? Where, like, if you were to give a brief synopsis of where are we now in terms of sabermetrics analytics in baseball?
Well, I don't want to hijack this panel and make it into the StatCast panel, but I will briefly. We just had our StatCast panel. We introduced some cool new stuff, and I think what we have learned a lot is it's got to be serving both masters, right? Like, for example, Dave and everybody and Harry at the advanced sites, like, we want to have the data that people can use to really come up with cool new things, but the fans also have to understand it. You know, you can't just put out a first step time with no context, because we did that a little bit. It didn't work out so well. So we're really trying to push out catch probability. We introduced hit probability, just easy to understand stats that are actually driven by really advanced data. I don't think it has to be like over the top and difficult to understand, as long as it's fueled by the right questions and the right thought and the right data behind it.
Well, Harry, let me even back up. What year did you start writing about baseball or get to Baseball Prospectus?
Oh, wow. I mean, I started working in baseball in 2007, because that's when Pitch FX came out. So okay. I started as a baseball writer probably 2008. And most of my focus in the past 3-4 years has not been on writing. It's been on building consulting practices. So we have, so where are we in baseball? Right. We're 10 years into the digital age of ball tracking, and we have such an enormous amount of information from that domain. We are able to start doing more longitudinal things about understanding how pitchers develop and look. So where we are now with StatCast is getting past just pitching, getting to the world of defense, base running, catcher skills, beyond what we've published at BP, but things like pop time, true arm strength, things like that. So we're just getting now into the kind of a second iteration of that, where it's going to be an even richer set of data, and I think that's going to revolutionize both the entertainment aspects, but also in the next couple years, it will start to have much more dramatic, widespread impact in baseball decision-making inside.
Well put, well put. Dave, what can you add to that?
Yeah, but I think when I look at where baseball is right now, I think we're transitioning away from front office doing analysis and front office decision-making to on-the-field decision-making. And I think StatCast is having a big impact on this, but we've really seen this is the first time probably in analytics history where we're impacting players, right? Like Daniel Murphy's talking about, like, I'm changing my swing based on what the data says. And this is not something that was even, I think, reasonable 5 years ago, that we would be producing an article, the player would read and be like, I'm going to do something different than I've done for 30 years and got to the big leagues, and I'm going to change because a nerd told me to change. Like, that was not possible. And so I think
was framing, I think. When the first papers on framing came out, catchers started to see that they're bad framers and work on it. So I can't imagine the scope of things that will happen now as every player on the field has relevant data being published.
I mean, I remember like in 2006, so before Pitch FX, when Felix Hernandez was not as good as he should have been with a 100-mile-an-hour fastball and a 92-mile-an-hour curveball, and he should have been amazing, and I had to like hand chart all the pitches, being like, oh, his first 17 pitches of every game are fastballs. I wonder if someone should tell him this. And then like, I wrote this open letter on USS Mariner, and someone gave it to his pitching coach, and the pitching coach was like, hey man, breaking balls in the first inning maybe. And like, that was like the first time I can ever remember impacting the field, and that was like a once-in-a-lifetime total fluke because someone printed out a blog post. But now it's like every team has analysts doing crazy stuff. They're getting it down to the field level. They're moving Andrew McCutchen to right field because Mike Petriello wrote an article about it on MLB.com. Like, okay, well, I think we're really getting to the point where this isn't just about let's find the undervalued stat. This isn't about on-base percentage anymore. This is about how do we take the raw material that these players have and help them maximize their potential.
Patrick?
Yeah, and from our side, looking at how teams are trying to value players, the big thing that's changed there is much more of an ability to normalize things, right? That's starting from the major leagues and moving down, but consistently moving down to lower leagues. You know, when they're trying to evaluate players either for a draft or acquisitions, you know, you want to really get a value on that player that isn't just based on outcomes. You talked a lot about not being based on outcomes, being on their performance, and that's a much better way. Now you have a much better chance of isolating performance and really seeing where a guy's value is relative to peers that you might be considering.
And you guys can jump in on this, but along those lines, it does feel like we're getting more baseball-y, doesn't it? Absolutely. What do you think? Harry, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's happened in two ways. I think Dave's example has become more common. I know it's a bit tongue-in-cheek about McCutcheon, but it's true. These are the types of things that we're seeing and have empirical evidence for, the same things the teams are looking at. So I think what's probably most exciting about that change is what you're seeing on the kind of the staffing side, on terms of what types of people are getting into the analytics side of baseball. So it used to be the story about people like me coming from the outside, and that doesn't really happen so much anymore. What I'm starting to see is the new trend is former players. So you got guys like Brian Bannister, John Baker, Dave Bush, even David Aardsma has shown up at a baseball analytics conference, a guy who just was still trying to get a major league job. But he's like, just in case I can't throw well enough, let me start learning about this side of the business. So it is getting so baseball-y that the guys who have played the game at the highest level are now actually saying, this information is useful for me. So a guy like Bannister, who used it himself to improve his game, they're now taking it to their pitching staffs at the major league level and using information that we're talking about, that you're publishing, and actually making it actionable on the field for the players. And that is, that's the trend that we're going to see more and more over the next few years, I think.
What's really annoying is like the jocks have always been like, oh man, we're going to be the jocks in high school, and the nerds were always like, we're going to be your boss in 30 years, and now the jocks are becoming the nerds and taking the boss jobs too. Hey jocks, leave some jobs for the rest of us.
Mike, your thoughts on that? As far as I know, you're doing the measurements again. StatCast is doing the measurements on this, but it seems like it has opened up a whole field for a lot of what, like, the ex-players that I work with, the major league players at MLB Network, have always been talking about, really getting into the weeds.
Yeah, I think Harry made a great point just now about the ex-players who are getting back into the game kind of on the data side, because that's really been the big disconnect over the last couple of years. Every team's got smart people, every team's got data guys, but not every team has done a great job of getting that information to the field. I think the Pirates probably stood out over the last couple of years as being a really great job of getting that data to the players in the way they can use it, because you can have the best information in the world, but if the players don't use it, it really doesn't help you at all. So we're seeing a lot of that, but I also just think the players themselves are getting a little smarter, maybe because as time goes on, the average age is younger. These guys grew up in a more digital world. I mean, these guys grew up on Facebook or social media, whatever their ages were. Because when I say things like, Chris Bryant is looking at his exit velocity and launch angle, and maybe that's why he's increasing his power. And I've had people push back a little bit and say, well, that's not new. Like, hit effects data existed for 10 years. Why would the teams not have said that before? I'm sure they did, but I kind of think that it's more of a public vocabulary thing, that the players are really starting to get it and think about this more than they might have if it was just someone from the front office saying, do this. I think that's made a big change.
Patrick, thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's, not just the players, but the front office themselves, have evolved with younger people coming in. I think there's been for a longer time that kind of information in the front office, but it's been a limited set of users that's been taking advantage of it, and now that's becoming a wider audience.
At the same time, there is the majority out there that has no idea about any of this stuff, that is still, I even said it's not about on-base percentage. And what you find is there's a lot of people that haven't caught up to on-base percentage. So where are we on that, as far as, like, even when you think, okay, we're talking to this audience, we can all talk that same language, but I don't know what percentage it is of baseball fans, of hardcore baseball fans, you could call them, that are really still on, what you would call sabermetrics 1.0.
Yeah, but I think, obviously at Fangraphs we have a pretty decent reach at this point, but we also understand there's a lot of people who don't read Fangraphs who like baseball. But I think, especially broadcasters, people who are announcing the games, they have a really strong ability to influence the casual fan's opinion of what's happening. And as we're educating them, I think it's trickling down, right? So, I think the days of Juan Gonzalez winning the MVP, those are over, right? And so, when Juan Gonzalez doesn't win the MVP anymore, fewer people think that Juan Gonzalez type play. Chris Carter got non-tendered and signed for $3 million. 10 years ago, he gets $150 million in free agency, right? They had 45 home runs or whatever. Like, I think the understanding of how significant the changes are within the game, even if the casual fan doesn't understand them themselves, the broadcasters can be like, hey, look, Mookie Betts is an amazing player. When 10 years ago, Mookie Betts might have been Ben Zobrist, and we would have had to like shout from the rooftops for a decade that he was a really good player. Now he finishes third in the MVP. Everyone understands Mookie Betts is awesome. So I think that maybe the understanding of why things have changed isn't necessarily there with the casual fan, but I do think the casual fan is the floor of information that they have. Even if they're not using the right numbers, I think they understand the game better.
Let me go to Harry next, because again, you're also you're writing for hardcore. It's hardcore fans. But your thoughts, like how many people really get it and are ready for that next phase?
Does it matter? I mean, the game can be beautiful without any of these numbers, and that's the key thing, is that the romance and the excitement of the game and the interest of the play and the drama that baseball creates, these numbers don't detract from that, or there's no trade-off there. So I think what's happening is just the same way our industry is maturing, because we've had 10 years of data that's been public. I think the baseball writer community, the baseball broadcaster community, they've all been exposed to these things. They've been reading and interviewing people and having exposure to these concepts. So now it's no longer foreign. It's something that the numbers can make sense to the broadcaster in a way that they maybe didn't just 5 years ago. And it's no longer just about, like Dave said earlier, just about which stat is the inefficiency, what's the Moneyball stat. It's about we are measuring things on the field because they're relevant to baseball, and the information can be used to evaluate players, strategize the game, make decisions about projecting players and what their future is going to look like. And as long as we keep those things contextualized, as long as those numbers are part of that baseball concept, it's just going to naturally grow, or to the point where you just look back and go, oh, we're constantly talking about baseball stats and WAR, or defense independent pitching stats and things like that. It's just natural because it's been discussed in a natural way.
And you think we'll be saying that about tunneling at some point? That sort of thing?
I think so. I mean, because the concept of how the pitch tunneling and the sequencing, it's not a new concept. This is an ancient baseball concept that goes back, same with framing. People are like, framing's new. I was like, the first reference of framing we found in baseball literature was in 1924. So same thing with tunneling and sequencing and deception and making the batter have to make a late, difficult decision on a pitch. We're just going to be able to measure and surface those things now. And I think as more and more people do research with the data and more people do publications on the data, maybe not this season, but next season, I think you'll start hearing those words about sequencing and tunnel and decision points regularly in broadcasts, because they make sense in baseball. We just have to prove that the numbers match up to what we've always experienced. And that's the part, I think, where we are now.
All right, let me ask the same question to Mike then, because what percentage do you think is not up to speed on that? Is there still that schism or knowledge haves and have-nots?
There is definitely a bit of a culture shock for me writing for Dave at Fangraphs to go into the larger audience of MLB.com, because you want to educate, you want to say, well, these are actually the better stats to use, but you can't just jump right into dropping weighted runs created plus and assume you're not going to lose half the audience. I can give you an example. Like I said, we introduced some new stats today, catch probability and hit probability, and when I wrote the introductory article, I had to pause for a second and think about how to express it. Like, I wanted to use weighted on base average because that's the quote-unquote right way to do it, and we ended up going with OPS. Even though OPS is kind of flawed for a lot of reasons, it's directionally accurate, most of the same names, and I went with that because I thought more people would get it, the concept would pervade the general consciousness a little better. It's definitely a bit of a battle. I kind of pick and choose, like, where do I really need to use the extremely advanced stat, and where will a stat that's not perfect but good enough kind of do the job? I think that's kind of the daily push and give.
I think that says something right there, right? Like 10 years ago, the idea that OPS was like the floor stat, like, oh, we have to use OPS. Like 10 years ago, we were like, you're using OPS. This is so great, right? Like, if you saw OPS in a column, the guy won like Writer of the Year. And now this is like the crappy stat that we use when we think you're not up to date.
Oh, how passé. Yeah, I know. Patrick?
I'll tell you one funny thing, though. You're in an audience like this, and you kind of realize everyone's into it. But one of the eye-openers for us always is we'll go, do college interviews, right? And these people are coming in saying we're sports fans, baseball fans, and we have a bunch of questions on our little, questionnaire sheet. What's WAR? What's OPS? What's the difference between OPS, OPS plus? Nobody gets them right. Nobody knows them. I mean, literally 5% of the kids who come in and say they're baseball fans, they don't know it. So one thing that's great about some of the stuff you're showing is now if on a broadcast, they just don't care that much about that, but on a broadcast, you get to see those cool graphics, and you can see the path that the fielder's taking. Those are things that are going to be useful no matter how interested you're into the hardcore stats or not.
You should put a job posting on Fangraphs. We'll get you people.
You brought up something interesting about Chris Carter, and there were a lot of guys with the traditional numbers that were waiting for the phone to ring this year, where I even started to question, like Mike Napoli had 34 homers, 101 RBIs. That means something, and I've fought that for a generation. It's like, that doesn't mean anything, but when it's kind of dismissed, I'm like, wait, it doesn't mean nothing. It means something, especially in the run-scoring environment. Has it swung too far where the home run and RBI guys are, being, minimized in the marketplace?
I think you could make an argument that perhaps we have overly adjusted against power hitters. I mean, I think like one of the things that we know is probably not correct in wins above replacement is the position adjustments, right? Like Tom Tango came up with these a decade ago in a different run environment, and they haven't changed since. And like, there's a good argument to be made that like we're probably undervaluing designated hitters a little bit, and like maybe a decent first baseman is worth a little bit more than we think. And so I do think that there's an argument to be made that we've swung 10% too far, but we've gone from like one ditch towards heading towards the other ditch. Like it's definitely an improvement in terms of getting better players, getting the Mookie Bettses of the world to be recognized as valuable. So if we're undervaluing position players who hit home runs and get RBIs by 10%, that's better than undervaluing Ben Zobrist by 80%. So it's an improvement even if we're not still at the right spot.
Good point. What do you think?
I mean, I think I agree with Dave to some extent, but I do think in addition to the fact that players who can have a wide variety of skills are bringing more value, just the increase in home runs has really sort of devalued this power skill. And it remains to be seen if this is something that's a 1 or 2 year blip or if this is going to be the new normal from now on. And if that's true, then I don't know that I see the pendulum swinging back the other way. And obviously we don't have enough data to know what the home run swing is going to look like, because if it goes back to the way it was 2 years ago, then I think Chris Carter starts to get paid a little bit more. Probably not a ton, not as much as he wants to be because he's so limited in other skills. But it's really about the context of the league in terms of that one particular skill that doesn't get the payment that it used to.
Is this more about the change in the way contracts are being given out to guys when they reach that free agency point and they're not a blue chip free agent who's going to be picked up? So these guys are kind of hanging around. Their contracts, people have been saying this to me and they keep pointing it to me, and I'm starting to believe it, that there's been an NFLization of these contracts where these guys are not being guaranteed the same amount of money. There's more incentives in the contracts and escalators in contracts. So is that part of the market dynamic shifting, trying to they're trying to make the market more efficient because A, they know that they can get power from other sources, or B, they know they can get that value from other skills that may be cheaper than power. But also, is it just the nature of the contract market itself changing? So we look at these particular class of players, maybe they fit into that market segment rather than that skill segment.
Well, Patrick, even like Mark Trumbo has the good exit velocity, his launch angle, he changed and all that, and he got paid decently, but maybe that was just by the one club. I wonder, things were in his favor, and still it was not seen the way it would have been a generation ago.
Yeah, and I think when they do the math on what's a comparable offer, they're using different metrics to make that comparable, and that's going to benefit some people and hurt some other people.
Yeah, it is interesting with the marketplace out there. Has everyone caught up now? Major league teams? A major league team? It seems like there was a couple of holdouts that just got there.
Yeah, you still see a fair bit of variability, right? Even just with the handful of teams that we work with, they're pretty different in terms of how they take in information and what kind of value they put on it, especially as it relates to statistical information versus old school scouting information, how they weigh what their scouts think versus what the numbers say. And so there's still a pretty wide gap from what we can tell, and we have a relatively small sample, but we have a not insignificant.
Is everybody there? I think Dave, you've written about this, right? Has everybody finally gotten there where kind of using the same tools and have the same sort of, at least, type of people in the front office?
So yes, in the sense every team has an analyst now, at least one, right? But I think Patrick's right that there's variations in if you have an analyst and he's in the room and at the trade deadline and he's like, we shouldn't trade for Ryan Howard, and the GM's like, who cares what you think? You might be there that you have an analyst, but that's very different than if you're the Dodgers and you have 35 PhDs on staff and you have a hedge fund and you're investing in all these crazy things the Dodgers are doing. No one is kind of on the same playing field just because they all have an R&D department. And so I do think there's still variation, especially in how the information filters up, right? Every team in baseball has a guy doing StatCast data, doing analysis, but the question is, where does that report go, right? Like in the organizations that I think are probably still in the lead, that organization, that report that the analyst does or the R&D team, not only goes to the GM, but it goes to the coaching staff, it goes to the players. It's filtering through the organization, where I think the teams that are still behind, maybe they only had their analyst for a couple of years, maybe their system's new, maybe they're still building their system, and the only guy who ever sees it is the analyst's boss. And he's like, wow, that would be great if my boss cared about this, but this isn't going anywhere.
I think you're right, Gabe, because what's happened is we definitely can't say there's a team in baseball that does not have an analytics practice. They all do literally have somebody now. I think, though, the range, despite that floor going up, I think the range has actually gotten wider because of those high-end teams. I mean, Mike Fitzgerald was not a player, but he was the first guy to be in that clubhouse role, as written about in Sawchek's book about the Pirates. Now he's with Arizona. So there's this thing where they're recognizing what's sophisticated now isn't the amount of data you have, it's the type of people that are communicating it. So there's still variation in terms of how much data teams are collecting. Not every team has gone hog wild having ball tracking systems in their minor league parks, but most of them have. So that's kind of evened out. But it's now in that where is that interface? Like you said, is it just the GM? Is it somebody on the field staff? So if anything, we've gone to these teams that have these very nascent staffs that are just starting to explore what data can do, to these teams that have a guy who's actually on the field and in the clubhouse working with the players directly, integrated actually as a member of the coaching staff. So to me, that makes the gap in analytics just, now we've gone through the roof.
Mike, where are you on that?
I agree with you, Harry, but I think if you think about the replacement player of a player on the field, it's kind of the same thing in the front office. Like the replacement level in the front office has gone up. There's really no team, there are gaps, absolutely, but there are no teams anymore that are just completely off the grid. And from a fan of intelligent decision-making in baseball, I think that's great. I also kind of like the team that was doing the weird thing that would come up with something nobody else did.
We still have the Rockies.
All 30 teams do a great job.
Rockies guys were here.
Not all 30 teams do a wonderful job. But there are some teams, you could guess, that made some real weird decisions that made for a lot of fantastic articles. You just don't see that anymore. Everybody, even if you don't agree with it, they really seem like they've put some really intelligent thought and data behind it. And I think that's new. That hasn't always been the case.
Dave Stewart was great for Fangraphs. I miss Dave Stewart a lot.
Patrick, what do you think the gap is in, I don't know, is there a knowledge gap or application of knowledge gap still within baseball?
Yeah, I think it's more the application of knowledge. I think, you can even just see in terms of what they reference first, right? And so it's just, and that probably isn't going to change if we have like GMs who like to do it a certain way, and that's how they're going to continue to do it. And so, even just from what we see, how they choose to build a system where they can take a look at a player, some people like to have other information right up front and different information. So there's definitely, it's just different, but based on each individual GM and the staff that he put together.
Is there a competitive advantage to be grabbed? Like, what would that be, Harry?
Wow, that's a really, I think I've said it a few times, it's having that experienced individual who can speak with authority to the players. So experienced major league player, Dan Herron, or someone who, with the Mike Fitzgerald case, has built up that credibility over time in practice. But whatever it is, that is the advantage. Because no matter what you do, it's about who the information gets to. So if you actually have, think about detach your information processes all the way as far as you can, and maybe it's just analyzing late round draft picks, where you're just using collegiate numbers and a sophisticated system. And there are consultants who have gone from team to team, some of you may know who I'm thinking of, and have basically done that and built draft systems for teams that's doesn't have to interface with too many people. So that maybe was a big advantage, but now that's becoming more commoditized. It's always going to be the communication. We're going to keep getting more data, more advanced data. Eventually, we're going to get player tracking in minor league stadiums. It may not be next year, 5 years, but eventually we're going to have the same thing we had with ball tracking in big leagues, where that's just the tip of the iceberg. So eventually, this player tracking technology will become affordable enough where it's down there. And then you start getting into a situation where it's no longer just your major league coaching staff, it's going to become your lower level player development people who are going to be trying to use data at the AA level, at the high A level, to help their pitchers and hitters change and adapt. So where I see things going is, one, there's going to be a leading edge of the technology becoming cheaper and more accessible to be installed in all these places. But it's only going to make a significant material impact when you have the communicators.
Mike?
I think we're seeing some teams really make a big step forward in injuries and rest, and I think that's interesting to me. I hate it when you see a guy who played terribly for a month, and then later you find out, oh, I had a really bad knee, I just don't want to come out of the lineup. Like, you're not helping yourself, you're not helping the team. There's always going to be that macho clubhouse thing, but I think if you can have the data, and maybe the player will go to the team and say, look, if you start 130 games for us, we think you're going to hit 300. And if you start 160 games for us, we think you're going to hit 250. It's going to make you look worse come contract time. It's not going to help the team. Here's the data we have to back it up. Rest is good. It's not great to be Cal Ripken anymore. Like, I don't think we're ever going to see that again. And then obviously anybody who can solve the Tommy John issue is going to be the next billionaire in baseball. But I really do think that's true, and we're seeing that. We're like the Red Sox, with their sleep room. I think like the Pirates, Ben Lindbergh wrote about this a couple years ago, where they had the bio-tracking. That's going to be the next big deal. If you can keep your players as close to 100% more often than not, that's how you get the next efficiency.
I think like the thing that maybe, and these are good answers, I would have said those, so I didn't say them. But the thing that maybe is most underrated about a general manager or president of baseball operations is not how they manage down, which is mostly how the focus is on how they handle their staff below them, but on how you manage up, right? Like the variable at every team in baseball is the crazy owner with $1 billion who can do whatever he wants. And like, it's no secret that like Scott Morris is like, well, it's February and my guy doesn't have a home, let's call the learners. And like, now that guy signs with the Nationals. Or Peter Angelos is like, man, no one wants to bid $50 million on Chris Davis, but I'll bid $150 million on Chris Davis, and that just cost the Orioles $100 million. And like, you can have as many sleep efficiencies as you want, but you're not getting $100 million out of sleep efficiency. So I think like if you can manage your owner and keep him away from disastrous, crazy decisions, this is what makes Theo Epstein really freaking valuable. And like Dave Dombrowski has basically made a career out of this, as he worked for Mike Ilitch. When Mike Ilitch was like, we have to win every year, and Ilitch did some weird things, but Dombrowski was able to kind of keep him under control. And like, here's how we're going to build a good team. Like, we're going to trade for Miguel Cabrera instead of doing that weird thing. And so I think I feel really bad for guys like everyone who's run the Angels in the Artie Moreno era. It's like, okay, I get Josh Hamilton and C.J. Wilson. I'm going to go try and win now. Like, I think if you can manage your owner and let him just basically fund baseball ops and then not be baseball ops, you have a huge advantage.
Patrick, what's the next competitive advantage?
Again, one of the things we tend to look at, just because we work as much with amateurs as pros, is that technology filtering down and who's going to be able to take advantage of it at lower levels. The draft is important, player development's important, and I think one of the big advantages is when teams can take the information that they learned at the major league level and start to apply that down to the minor league, down to the amateurs. And obviously, you talked before, like the technology is already moving there, and I think that's going to be a big one.
Let me ask you the big picture question that I actually try to answer myself all the time. Why did this happen? Why was there such resistance by human beings in baseball?
Oh, man. Well, this is a psychology panel? The baseball stat nerd.
I was told you knew.
Yeah, I know all the answers to all things. I think it's, baseball has been run by old white men for a really long time, right? And old white men do not like to be told they're wrong, and we do whatever we can to hang on to power, and it's not a great system in the world, but this is basically how it works. It's like people who have power don't want to give up power, and they don't want to cede any of their ground to other kinds of people. And so I think, baseball basically has had a culture for a really long time that is being challenged by preliminary outsiders, and it took it really becoming a business, right? Where it's like, this guy's making a $30 million mistake, and the owner's not gonna put up with that anymore. When it was like, you're making a $50,000 mistake, who cares? But now that it's so much money involved, the owners are not gonna let you just be like, well, it's, this guy's going to make the same mistake as that guy. And so I think the outsiders challenging the culture of baseball, it took the financial consequences in order to change that.
Great answer. See, nowhere. Had that great answer. So either answer that, or then what do we learn from knowing that just happened?
I was going to say that, Brian, there's a wonderful book, I'm told, tracing the path of baseball statistics through history and how come it took us so long to get to wide acceptance. I think you've heard of it.
Yeah,
it's a good one. I do think that a lot of it, similar to what Dave said, but partially it's the technology has made this stuff more accessible directly to the players and the people around them. And I mean, it used to be before social media, before everybody had websites, they were either getting their information directly from the team themselves or from the local newspaper. All right? And the local newspaper certainly wasn't going to go into this deep dive stuff. And now it's pretty easy for any player to call up Fangraphs or Prospectus or Baseball Reference or anything like that. And I think that a lot of them are learning that it's important to their own financial survival. I can give you an example. I had a player approach me a couple years ago after I wrote something on Fangraphs saying, hey, this is really good. I always thought I was a good outfielder, but the metrics hate me, and this is why I'm not getting paid. Like, can you help me understand why? And I kind of took him through some of the concepts, and he changed his game a little bit, and he's been pretty successful for that. I think players are really understanding, even if they like batting average and RBIs, it's not what's going to get them paid anymore, and that's a big motivator for them to learn.
Did you get a cut of Dexter Fowler's deal?
It wasn't Dexter Fowler. I can probably
It's all about winning, right? I mean, that's, you know, there's I think, well, it's not just all about winning. I think there's also a avoid blame for losing. So that's why there's don't try the new thing, because if it doesn't work, you get pointed at. I mean, I'm thinking of right now Ned Garver, the pitcher who passed away just very recently. But you might remember on the Effectively Wild podcast, they called him up on the phone. They cold called the man and said, you know, what was the game like? What was your manager like? Why did you guys do this? And he's like, our manager played the percentages because as long as he played the percentages, he could never be criticized when it went wrong. So I think that's a very big driver of human nature, is that you want to be credited for the success, but you don't want to be blamed. So part of having heavy-duty analysis and factual data on things makes it harder to hide from that. So I think that's one part of it. So I think you're seeing that in where I think one of the most important things we're going to be seeing next in technology is the injury prevention part. And Pat and I were just talking about this before, about how, you know, these Modus sleeves, which can measure the tension on the elbow. And I'm sure there's a lot of work to be done to make these things, you know, worthwhile. But the question we were discussing was, why would you not wear this in a game? Because it may give a signal to someone that you're fatiguing, or there's something strange happening before the pitching coach or the catcher picks up. It's like, well, they don't want that data collected because it could be used against them. They may be scared of it. So someone's going to have to basically step into the breach and say, I'm going to wear that sleeve during a game, and I'm in my free agent year, and I'm going to risk it. And if they still make their $20 million after that, the other guys will be like, oh, okay. Or the guy wore the sleeve and was good. Somebody needs some safe story. Like, there's the slow followers. Baseball is a slow follower industry. It moves at a snail's pace. All the stuff that MLB has been doing the last 10 years, like Bob Bowman and Corey Schwartz came in and shook up the world because it's forced them. I mean, I've seen changes in how teams buy consulting services and buy technology because of the advent of PitchFX and StatCast. So people are being pulled along into this by the technologists. They're slowly accepting it. As soon as somebody sticks their neck out and has some success, more people will do it. But we're forcing them. What you guys are doing is basically forcing the issue to move forward.
Patrick, yeah, talk to that. Has the resistance changed? Is it much more open, or is there that initial, when a team gets something, is that still initial resistance? Is that just a natural thing, or how does that work?
I mean, certainly if we talk, I don't know if we're talking about over years, but over years the resistance has changed, I think, dramatically, and I think it's a result of, like you're saying, having that information maybe more available. But, you know, in the older days when we did just like the league system back in the mid-2000s, right? There was really no appetite to try to really even pull information out of that system, nonetheless combine it with statistical information. But that changed as that information became more available, and I think as teams saw that it became more valuable to them. So I mean, really, it's a complete 180 from how it was, you know, and we're only talking about 10, 12 years ago. There was essentially no appetite. Everything was just on paper and spreadsheets, and no one wanted to put everything together or try to take in feeds. And now everybody wants all the feeds they can get.
Okay, so now here's the question. I think it's the actual panel. It's what's next? So what is next?
Yeah, but I think I answered it a little bit earlier, but I really think moving to the field level player development side, I think that's the future of analytics and sabermetrics, is for so long we've been trying to identify the talent in a person and be like, this guy's true talent level is this. And Matt Carpenter's true talent level when he was a senior at TCU was he could hit 1 home run in college. And Matt Carpenter is now a top 20 Major League Baseball player. How did the St. Louis Cardinals do that? That's really the fascinating, huge value add that a team can find, is how do I turn Daniel Murphy from a league average mediocre second baseman into the 3rd best hitter in baseball, or whatever he was last year. Like, there's huge gains to be made out of taking these guys who are moderately valuable, the Justin Turners, the Josh Donaldson as a prospect, and turning them into superstars. That's where you can change a franchise, right? When you get one of those guys, or two of those guys, or three of those guys. And so I think the push is really going to be away from talent evaluation of this guy is this thing, and we should just pay him a lot of money because he's good, and more towards performance improvement or player development of like, how do I find the next Kyle Hendricks? How do I find these guys who I can get for basically nothing or very little investment and turn them into really good players? And if you can do that sustainably for a long time, you're going to win for a long time. The Cardinals have won 85 games or more for like 15 of the last 16 years because of player development, not necessarily talent evaluation, and I think that's where this is all headed.
I'm excited to obviously keep educating the public, but breaking down the numbers into actual skills. I mean, getting more baseball, like kind of as you said. You could take fielding, for example. Whether it's DRS or EZR, fielding percentage, or whatever metric you like, it's one number, and that's cool and that's useful, but it's interesting to me to say, well, this guy's the best, but why? Is he the fastest? Because, he's Billy Hamilton. He's just pure speed. Does he take fantastic routes? Is it Kevin Kiermaier, who gets a little bit of a head start before the pitch is even thrown because he's reading the catcher's signs? That gets right down to the baseball things you're talking about, but it's based on data. And so I think that's going to be really interesting to be able to break this down further. You can do it either way. If you just want the one number, cool. We can do that. But if you want to know, all right, who's actually the fastest, or who actually has the best, prediction of what's going to happen, I'm excited to be able to do that too. It breaks it down into further skills, which is great.
I think there's two parts. I mean, breaking down all those separate skills. Like, for example, we talk about outfield range, but there's components to it. There's the jump, there's the top speed, there's how well they glide into position. All those things may age differently. All those things may develop differently. So you may be able to, by breaking down into these component skills, which is fun to do, it's really cool to do, it's great for the entertainment of it, but also from an analytical perspective, it gives us things that will help us understand how players are going to develop in ways that we don't have right now. So I think that's another thing, is better projection of players, better, smarter moving of guys to new positions. When does a guy like Kutch go to center to right? When do you say my second baseman can play third? Because we've measured his arm and we know he's in the 80th percentile third baseman, we can now model our defense with that skilled player. So you're getting into this kind of mixing of the data with the prediction, which you would normally just do with scouting and stats. Now we're saying these are the baseball skills, and we think his range, we project his range a certain way. That is much more valuable than what we have today.
Yeah. And I think, like you're saying, and we touched on this before, like that stuff trickling down and the more years of history, right? So it's still relatively new, a lot of this type of data. When now you have StatCast on the major league level, which moved a lot of TrackMan level data down, and it's going to get to the collegiate level and all. Now you can really, when you have the multiple years of that data, you can start to do projections. How did those guys become it? Were there some latent talents we could have discovered when he was playing, 4-year college ball or whatever? And does that lead to something? Or, it'll give you much better ability to do projections. And which is one of the big things anybody's looking for.
How much would you pay for Seth Lugo's high school spin rate?
More than I'm comfortable admitting publicly, to tell you the truth.
The thing is, though, there is high school data. There's not. TrackMan systems are at most of the big wood bat tournaments and the big. So there's. That's don't be fooled. There's actually several years of high school level data. I've actually seen data for pitchers under the age of 16 coming through proper systems, and I'm not sure how useful that is because of the variety of players, but it's there, it's happening, and you also have folks getting to the point where they're installing these in their training facilities. So it's not just guys like Driveline, but there's also places like, I think there's a place here that has a smart cage where you can go and there's a pitch FX camera and you can get your pitches tracked there. So these things are going to be used and used and used more and more and more all the way down. And it's not just stats, it's actual baseball skills. Player attributes, words that scouts use will start coming out of these technical systems where we measure a pitch and we can say that slider has outstanding depth. That may be something only a scout would have said before, but we can start finding these things, or we can start identifying all the way down to these junior level pitchers.
Let's jump into the dugout for a second. I think we had a very interesting postseason where we saw incredible scrutiny for some of the best baseball minds that we have as far as managers, and Buck Showalter, Joe Madden, even Bruce Bochy, whose bullpen went into a death spiral. What's next there? Where clearly there's suboptimal decisions being made. Does that just continue or does that change?
I think that's changing right now. And Andy Green in San Diego is already talking about, like, he might use like a, really weird rotation and throw guys for 60 pitches at a time. And I know the Rockies did this a few years ago, but someone's going to try it at sea level, so maybe that'll work a little better. But I think we're getting a whole new breed of manager now, right? Like the days of, oh yeah, the guy who's been in AAA and he's 65 and like that's the next, that's not happening anymore. When Andy Green is like our age, basically. Like the managers now, like Gabe Kapler interviewed for a managerial job not too long ago. Dave Roberts is like 41. Like the age of the manager has come way down. And so I think the shift that happened in front offices 10, 15 years ago is now happening at the field level. And I think it's not going to happen as quickly, maybe, but we're going to see this transition over the next 5, 10 years where every manager in baseball is going to be at least curious. Like, they don't have to accept all these ideas, but they're not going to be closed-minded. They're not going to say, I have to use my closer in the 9th inning. Zach Britton's going to sit there in the wild card game and watch us lose. Like, that's never going to happen again, right? Like, Buck Showalter, I guarantee you if he makes the wild card game, Zach Britton's coming in like inning 4. Like, he can be like, Dylan Bundy can have a no-hitter. Here comes Zach Britton. Let's go. That's just never going to happen again. And so I think we're seeing that shift on the field level right now.
Yeah, well, Dave totally stole my answer there, so I'm going to just pretend I said all those things. I think you're right. I think the fact that we're seeing a change in managers, the types of people who are selected to manage is important. But I'm really fascinated to see the guys who had the opposite reputation who've shown a capacity to change. Like, I think Clint Hurdle is a really good example of that. When he was with Colorado, it was like had this reputation to be an old school rah-rah, and then he goes to the Pirates, and the Pirates kind of threw all this information at him, and it seems like he's done a pretty good job of accepting that and implementing that on the field. And the Pirates have been very successful the last couple of years. So the guys who are willing to change, they will change and they will be successful. And the guys who aren't going to keep these jobs. And I think that's going to be, in addition to the different types of people, I think that's going to be the next big change.
I don't think you had the success in Pittsburgh of Mike Fitzgerald and Dan Fox, having them be allowed into the clubhouse and allowed to interact directly with players if the manager didn't buy in. So the manager doesn't necessarily have to be a consumer of it, and doesn't even have to be a person using it and communicating it. He just has to understand and not be threatened by the presence of these things, and it's not about his authority. It's about making every player be the best they can be. And if that means talking to one of the analytics guys who maybe is not a former player, but knows how to talk and knows how to communicate, then that's what I think Hurdle that's probably where the biggest changes came, was not by him changing his dugout behavior, but by changing the clubhouse behavior.
Right. Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot of visibility into that level, but the one thing I would throw out is look at where your analytics guys are on most teams, look at where they are on the organization chart compared to where they were a few years ago, and how much money they're making compared to a few years ago. They're more important people who are more likely to be listened to.
Right. Let me ask you something if you can get this page back up. There you go, because mine went. Tactically, though, I'm just talking about, there you go. Tactically, just what those guys did. What I found was talking to the baseball ops people after the game and all the things that they thought, all the things that they knew, still didn't get to, and I'm going to say it again, to very smart managers, to brilliant baseball minds. I don't know if you call it choking, amount of choking done by manager, but just, I think it points out that one human being is maybe not enough, is what I'm saying. Does that change? Because I think that's the thing I would change like right away. One guy can't make those decisions. It should be clear one guy can't make all those decisions under pressure.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, and like it'll be interesting to see how the culture of the clubhouse changes to allow these people to maybe come into the clubhouse, as Harry was talking about, who maybe aren't former players or are former players who have some credibility, who can make that kind of call and help the manager make the call. I do think, though, that we are in a place where, I remember in the postseason, like in Game 7, when Aroldis Chapman comes running back out after getting used weirdly in Game 6, and I was like, forget it, go Indians. Joe Madden doesn't deserve to win this game because of what he's doing. Like, this is craziness. And like, I remember thinking like Joe Madden has lost his mind. This is a guy who won, and like clearly is a very smart guy and knows more about baseball than I do. I don't think we know that we have the right answer on these kinds of things. Like 10 years ago, I think we could have been pretty confident, like OPS is better than batting average, and I'll fight you if you think it's wrong. But like, you shouldn't use Aroldis Chapman like that. I'm not going to fight you on that one because I don't have enough information to be as strong-willed in my belief as I was about, which metrics to use in order to evaluate a hitter as I do on whether this guy should keep pitching to that batter because you know something about, the fact that he smoked a bunch of weed last night, or like you just have so much more information than we do. I think our ability as outsiders to critique a manager's decision is less than it was to critique the trades or the free agent signings or the Ryan Howard extension. Like, I was pretty confident the Ryan Howard extension was the wrong call. I'm never going to be that confident about a manager's decision.
I agree with you, because right in game. I think the Game 6 decision on Chapman is very debatable. It's fascinating in a lot of ways. But what these managers think before the game and what they talk about, and this is the way we're going to execute, and then if that changes in the heat of battle, where are we on that?
I almost wonder if we'll see baseball move towards more of a football-like coaching structure, right? Think about in the NFL, the head coach, for the most part, doesn't really call the plays, right? He's the leader of men. He deals with the media. He deals with the players' personal problems, all this kind of stuff. He keeps the ship afloat. But it's maybe the coordinator who's running the plays. Maybe we see that more in baseball. You know, we don't even need the manager to be up to speed so much as we need him to allow the bench coach to make these decisions. Like tap him on the shoulder and say, hey, it's time for the pitcher, or no, don't do the sacrifice bunt here. And then the manager deals with all the clubhouse problems. I think that could be an interesting way to change the culture and have the more effective decision-making being made while you still have the baseball guy being the face of it.
Right.
I think that this kind of comes down to what Mike Tyson once said, is that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. So, So I mean, that's you game plan, but eventually you're in the dugout and it's the heat of the moment. And you know, I remember one point where they had the camera on Madden and Chris Bosio, the pitching coach, and Chapman hadn't gotten up yet or something, or another pitcher hadn't gotten up yet. And it was like, how come you haven't got another pitcher up yet? Then all of a sudden you saw Madden go, oh, wait, and quickly say something, and they ran. It's like, so the pressure of Game 6, Game 7 of a World Series, even a baseball man like Joe Madden, who's been in the game for decades,
right?
Even in that situation, he may forget something important. So I think you're right, having this kind of distribution where how come Bosio couldn't just pick up the phone and get someone going? Why didn't he own that responsibility? You know, just delegate that out. In the pressure situations, you're more likely to have good decisions. But there's also just this, right or wrong, I don't know if it is, but we rely on managers to read the players and read the situation and make interpersonal judgments using their perhaps emotional intelligence more than their baseball intelligence. And like you guys have said, I have a hard time second guessing that. So yeah, it looked weird that they didn't have a pitcher coming up yet. Like, oh yeah, you forgot to call the bullpen. But I'm not going to question that you weren't ready to change pitchers yet. I think you may have had a brain cramp in there. But the general plan of like sticking with the guy, I don't know why, you know, and we don't know all those things that go into decisions.
Frequently, that when you hear it's like, well, we don't have all the same information, then you find out later he had no other information. I mean,
I know that happens all the time too, doesn't it? It's like we don't know that. We find out later. It's like, no, that was a dumbass move.
Yeah. You know? Or a player will say, the manager hasn't spoken to me in months. You know, it happens all the time. All right, do you use here? Just a fun thing. Game 6, 7-2. We got what, 2 outs in the 8th. Do you bring in Aroldis Chapman or not? Yes or no?
No.
Not a chance.
It's all no. That was quick. Okay. All right, that was easy. Easier than I thought. All right, we have your questions here. So here we go, the ones that you put out on Twitter. What's your favorite pet theory about the reason for the home run spike last season? Anybody?
Well, I've already kind of put mine out there where I think the players are getting smarter. I think the intelligence of pitchers has always been a little bit ahead of the hitters, you know, where they put more thought into data, and I think the hitters are thinking about this more. You know, how many guys have said that the Cubs have this mantra, basically, there's no slug on the ground. I'm not going to say that is the reason.
There's no what?
There's no slug on the ground. Slugging percentage.
No slug on the ground.
You can't slug on the ground. I certainly don't, I'm not going to say that's 100% of the reason, because I don't believe it is, but I think that's a bigger part of it than people might think, that the players are just thinking about this more. They're realizing extra base hits get paid, ground outs turn into outs, and I think I'm working on a fun project that we'll hopefully have up a little bit later that should hopefully shed some light on that.
Okay. It's the ball. It's the ball. It has to be the ball. Like, I don't buy it.
So sure it was the ball. Because the way the manufacturing tolerance, so the ball, the specification for the ball is set up such that Major League Baseball you've got like a 15-foot window of ball flight that you can manipulate just within the manufacturing tolerances. So when things spike, that's always the first place I look, whether it's in late 1990s or today. But then there was the exit velocity study that I saw at Sabre Seminar. I mean, I was sitting there like with someone who at the time worked for the Red Sox, and we were like, man, the ball's juiced. Like, I think the ball's juiced. Yeah, I think the ball's juiced. And then we look at the study, and Alan Nathan puts up the slide, and he says, if the ball is juiced, then the following information would not look like this. Like, there was some complete disconnect where if the ball was juiced, it would be going faster at every angle, not just certain. And we looked at each other, oh, no. Now I don't know anymore. So there's been ideas about the strike zone has moved. Hitters have changed their approach. Maybe the ball's a little hotter. Maybe it's the phase of the moon. I don't know. But I was so sure it was the ball too, Dave, but I don't.
I'm not sure it's the ball, but like it's a fun theory, and I like to laugh. So it's the ball.
Patrick, you have a theory?
I would think it's just a combination of things and just a natural randomness.
That is so boring. take a position there.
It's climate change.
All right, there we go.
There's kind of, he's getting there. Here's another one as almost as current as today's headlines. How will future analytics affect arbitration cases where traditional stats still rule as far as Dylan Betances is brought? Is that still, there's other mitigating factors. There are other, John Heyman was all up in my grill, but it seems like arbitration is kind of the last of the antiquated places, isn't it?
Arbitration apparently is like the place where the new information is not allowed. So even StatCast information, because it's not available to the players themselves, they can't use it in arbitration, it turns out. But it is there in the free agents market, and there is possibly, a challenge from the player side, from the labor side, about not having equal access. But in arbitration, it's a non-issue. These things can't be used.
Well, no, there was actually a discussion during the last CBA, not necessarily in the negotiations, but like when the sides were thinking about what to negotiate, is like, shouldn't we just junk this whole system and be like, hey, let's just bring in like 5 guys from the internet who are like Matt Swartz and all these people who run models who get like 98% of the way there, right? Like it's such a colossal waste of time. Arbitration is the biggest waste of time in baseball because they spend thousands of hours prepping slides and doing all this stuff. Most of it never gets seen because they don't go to hearings. And even when they do go to hearings, they're arguing over like $40,000 that the difference from the algorithm that Matt Swartz calculated in the trade rumors in October. Like, it is the dumbest process in baseball, and the only reason it exists is because they just haven't gotten around to killing it yet. So arbitration within the next 10 years, I think, will not exist, and maybe in the next CBA will go away, because you don't want to have a labor market that rewards an entirely different set of skills than the labor market that the teams are rewarding. Like, when you have Chris Carter getting non-tendered because he'd get $10 million in arbitration because he's going to get $3 million in free agency, that doesn't make any sense. Like, the arbitration system should not exist as it is.
The biggest problem with the arbitration system is, have you ever seen a player come out of an arbitration hearing feeling good about his relationship with the club?
Right.
So there's a reason teams avoid going through it, because you have no choice but to sit up there and you've spent probably 4 years or whatever, with this player, and from the time you drafted him to try and build up his confidence and show him what he's good about. And then you go into this arbitration hearing and go, yeah, he sucks. He can't do this thing, can't do that thing. We tried to teach him this, he can't do it, so we don't want to pay him that money. Like, oh, wow, that's great. Now you go back to spring training afterwards and go, we love you, you're great, you're going to be awesome.
Right.
So.
Most teams don't have Randy Levine. So 29 teams get to like have normal relationships, and then the Yankees are like, you're the worst.
You're hurting our attendance. That's my favorite. Now, here, I don't know if you guys have an answer to this, but this I know is applicable to a lot of people out there looking to get into the business of baseball. The question is, I'll just read it as is, the front office, labor market, internship model, et cetera, is broken in many ways. How does the industry fix it?
Well, we're trying to fix it as best we can at BP by the way we hire and build in people. I mean, I'm constantly turning people from baseball prospectus into working for teams. Just this past month, I lost 2 people out of the 5. So what we try to do is reach out and recruit and hire people who may not be good fits for the normal internship channel that's happening in baseball. And this is not just a baseball thing. The internship system is something that exists in most every industry and is problematic. So part of the problem with the level of diversity you have in baseball, the lack of diversity you have in baseball, is that internship system. So it's up to the teams in the league to be active about it, but I also feel like places like Baseball Perspective and our role in the industry, which we've placed literally dozens of people into major league front offices over the years, is to continue that, but do that in a way that's not here's the outsider channel of new ideas that come in, but people are doing more established, what's now becoming traditional baseball analytics work, but not necessarily coming from the same educational or professional or economic background that we tend to limit ourselves to in the baseball internship programs.
Mm.
Harry talked about risk earlier, where like people don't want to make risky decisions because if you don't make a risky decision, it's not going to blow up in your face. The safest thing you can do is hire a white guy from Harvard, and like, oh, my analyst is like just like it looks like everyone else's analyst, and he's doing the same analysis, and like I'm not going to get fired because my white guy from Harvard like did a study on StatCast data. But so there's a perceived risk that's probably not a real risk for teams to take chances on guys who don't have the pedigree, not just guys and girls and people of all genders, races, take chances on them, even if they don't necessarily, if they didn't go to Harvard, they didn't go to one of these schools, they don't necessarily have a computer science degree in order to get your $3 an hour internship that you're offering. I I think the league is probably going to have to step in at some point because the teams see it and say, oh, why should I be the one taking a risk when everyone else is just out there hiring white guys from Harvard? Why do I want to be the one bucking the system? At some point, the league should just be like, you're not allowed to do this anymore. You don't get to have 100% white guys in your front office. And like, this is just Major League Baseball policy. You have to pay these people. You have to pay them a reasonable wage. They have to work reasonable hours. They get weekends off occasionally. They get to see their family. They might get to have a dog. Like, we're going to let them live real lives, and also they can't all be white guys.
But that's not going to be enough. Like establishing business practices in an environment where you can say, well, we come apply for the job, we'll hire you. You don't have to be a Harvard degree anymore. I mean, I've been working with diversity and hiring issues for about 20 years in other industries, and not just this. And what I've learned now as a middle-aged white guy, as the face of the problem, that I have to go outside of my normal networks. There's hurdles between the people out there and the jobs, opportunities that I can provide them. I don't necessarily see or am aware of what those hurdles are. I have to find a way to stick my neck out and go out and find people. So I talk to, it's not just a problem with BP, and it's not just a problem in stats, or it's an editorial. I talk to people with clubs. They have the same problem with the teams. They're not getting diverse applicants. You're getting 98% of your applicants are white guys. There's no women or people of color applying. And so we ask, why is that? And what I learned some 20 years ago was that there's an assumption that you won't get the job because you don't look like the traditional people in there. So if you say, these people aren't applying, what can I do? It's like, you gotta go. You gotta get out of your networks of people and go out and recruit. You have to go out and look for people. And we were just talking about this. One of my most recent hires was that way, where I was looking and looking and looking. And I have conversations with people I think may be fits who may not naturally apply for the job. And most of them, they're not quite the right skills. But when you keep sticking your neck out that way and keep finding that, and I'm probably having awkward conversations with people because I'm going out of my comfort level, but I'm finding the people, and I'm getting better at communicating it and doing it. And I feel the onus is on me to go out and recruit, and that's the start. And unless you're actively recruiting for diversity, you will not have diversity. You have to go out.
That's also a competitive advantage, isn't it?
I think it's a huge
even if you just
advantage.
get the weakness is like-minded people. We just talked about why was there resistance? Like-minded people. Even if there's a bunch of us, well, all right, well, we all fit into the same category. We'd be making the same we think smart decisions, but someone else would come from the other, another place of life and say, and ask a more basic question than we would even ask.
It's right. So we don't even know it's all about what are the right questions to ask, and and how do you ask them. We're also talking about communication styles a lot today and how to communicate. Wow, I bet you something. Instead of having a bunch of white Ivy League educated dudes expecting them to communicate to these high school educated baseball players, maybe you should have some more diverse people who come from different backgrounds who may be able to communicate with more people. Maybe you have people who aren't necessarily PhDs in economics, who come from that social structure or have gone into that, been indoctrinated in kind of that social structure, who've been trained to make decisions certain ways. It's like eventually all the data becomes commoditized, and eventually the decision-making processes become commoditized. And the best way to avoid the latter thing happening is by diversifying, because you don't even know what the idea or question is going to be, because you just don't. So get some other people who don't think like you.
Interesting. Patrick, any take on that?
Yeah, I mean, we have pretty much the same experiences you're describing. I can talk about it more from our side, and it's not easy, right? The people that are coming to us are pretty homogenous, So it's a challenge to go out and find and acquire people that are going to give different opinions and have different backgrounds. I don't have any kind of answer to that, but it's clearly an issue for any of us doing this, I think.
Farhan Zaidi said it's like basically impossible to think that it's actually an efficient decision to hire the white guy 99% of the time, right? Like, there's just no way that of the population of the people who could give you the best information, that 99% of the time it's a white guy. And I think until we figure out, like, oh, we want to make efficient decisions everywhere else in the game, but this one place we're fine with a super inefficient decision, at some point, whether it's driven by the league or the teams or Baseball Prospectus and Fangraphs, whoever it is, we have to figure out how to get people to make an efficient decision based on hiring, not just white guys.
All right, and so major league teams are not doing that. I'm taking that. I take it because I just don't know.
I can only speak for what I see at BAM, not for the teams. I mean, for example, I think of our 30 beat writers, maybe a third are women or people of color, which is not enough, but it's pretty decent compared to the major league standard across front offices. I can tell you that in our office, one of the data people I rely on the most, came up through a paid internship and has got hired full time. He's not a white guy and is incredibly valuable to us. So I think I agree with everything pretty much everybody has said here, especially what you just said, Dave. You can't just assume that all of the best applicants are going to be white guys. It's just not real. I think half the problem is we're 5 white dudes here talking about diversity. How good are any of us doing? But I think all of us can do probably better than we're doing and keep moving on that path. There's
one last question here on StatCast data becoming public.
I was going to get through this without.
So, Mike, maybe you could answer that.
Oh, that was just the question?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
What is the state of that?
That's a very fair question, and something near and dear to your heart, I think, Harry. 3 years ago, when our CEO, Bob Bowman, introduced this new system here at Sloan, I wasn't actually working at the company. I think I was probably waiting for you, Dave. And I think I had the same reaction everybody did, which is, wow, this is super cool. I hope we get to play with this. And the commissioner at the time said that his goal was to have good access to the data out there. Because everybody in this room knows pitch effects. Not everybody knows hit effects. I mean, that was something that was out and very hidden to the teams that never really got out there. And I think we've done a pretty good job of that. I mean, through Baseball Savant, through, it's going to be on our site, MLB.com soon. You can get exit velocity for everything you want. You can play with that. You can get spin rate for anything you want. You can play with that launch angle. And that has kicked off some pretty interesting studies. And they haven't all been, complimentary. I think Rob Arthur or somebody did one about the balls that weren't tracked, and that was through the data that we put out there. So I think that has actually, been pretty good. We're happy with where that is. It's going to get better over time. We're going to have catch probability for every play, hit probability. There's a lot of data out there, and really the goal is to keep putting more and more out there.
Yeah, I think that's the key, is putting it in people's hands. And the more you do that, the more original ideas you get from the outside. I mean, there was a whole generation, people who have been my colleagues, and whether in consulting or gone at the teams, that came through that kind of, we just started doing work with PitchFX. So we've seen the value of it. So I know that it's a much more complicated, larger problem set, but the more BAM can, works to putting out more contextual things like the out probability, I think that's going to help people a lot, like understand what range means. When they start seeing out probability next to a range number, they'll start eventually understanding what these things mean. So I think the further contextualization is going to be big, but also the more stuff you guys put out on Darren's site or on the actual MLB.com property, it's going to just, you don't even know what questions are people asking. So we put the tunnels data out. Part of that was because, hey, there's a huge data set. This is a massive amount of data. Go for it. We don't know what you're going to do with it. So there's already hackathons and case competitions using that data. And that's the idea, is just put things out for the public as much as you reasonably can, as much as your boss will let you in terms of what, we have to make money somewhere, so we can't give away everything. But the more you can put out for people to experiment with and be creative with, the better for the industry.
All right. Well, this is a pretty good show. I enjoyed it. Harry, Mike, Dave, Patrick, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Great job, guys.